Yeah. Um, all right, let's get into it. So what we're gonna do today uh, is like we're gonna continue on the stuff with perception of sound. So this is like I like we've gone through a lot of stuff, and I know that last even last Thursday was a little bit painful with the Fletcher Munson curves. But so what I'm going to do is I'm building out like a worksheet for those so that you can actually practice with those things so that you can get kind of good at them. It's weird, but those Fletcher Munson curves will inform a lot of like your knowledge of how we hear and how we hear stuff. Like and I don't say it influence your mixing so much, but it's a good idea to understand how that works and understanding why we're like not as sensitive at low frequencies and high frequencies and all that kind of stuff. So, but I know that it was stressing some people out quite a bit last Thursday when we went over that. So I will get those. I'm gonna make a worksheet, little video work through, so to kind of work through like how to like get confident at doing those because it's real. I don't say it's like critical important, but it's a good idea. I mean, it's important for this class because you're gonna have homework and you have exam questions on it. But good stuff to know. So we left off talking about this idea and I guess where we left off last time was when we were talking about things like perceived versus what's physical, and we have these two kind of different things that are happening. When we talk about human perception, we have things like we call loudness. So loud, like we have amplitude, which is the physical phenomena, and then we have loudness, which is our perceived perceived level. And then we have things like we have pitch and then we have frequency. So frequency is the raw, what's physically happening, and pitch is our brain's interpretation of that. And then we're going to talk about this other one we call like we have like wave shape and waveform, and then we have timbre. So timbre is how we interpret the texture of sound, and then the wave shape or is going to be the physical, like what's happening with the wave. And then our perceived, I guess what I'm saying here is that we have our perceived version of it, and then we also have our physical version of it. And it's weird to think about it, but like I mean, this is just a little bit side trippy kind of stuff when you're thinking about like how human perception works. We tend to think about our human perception as reality, right? We tend to believe that like we rely on our senses to tell us what's going on in the outside world, whether it's smell or touch or sight or hearing or any of the senses that we use. We rely on our senses to give us information about what's going on in the outside world. But it's kind of weird to think about this, that there's limits. And that's kind of what we're talking about a little bit, is that there's limits to the human perception. And in terms of things like frame rates, for if we talk about in the visual field. So we can only perceive stuff happening up to a certain frame rate. And then like that's why we use video as a series of stills, but our brains perceive that as fluid motion because what we're doing is we're updating that information faster than our brains can see it as a flickering as a slideshow, so it gives us the impression that things are actually fluidly moving. And so it's about 30 frames per second is, well, we could say roughly around 24 frames per second, which that's what cinema film is shot at. So 24 frames per second is it's a slideshow happening at 24 frames per second, and our brain interprets that as fluid motion. Well, what like the thing is though, like there's things that are happening way outside of our human perception. So there's things like if we talk in terms of amplitude. So there's sounds that are quieter than of course 0 dB than we can hear. There's frequencies higher than 20 kilohertz that we can't hear. There's sounds that are lower than 20 hertz that we can't hear. And there's things that are happening at different rates that are faster and slower that are happening faster than our human perception can hear. And it's kind of weird because again, we tend to think of our visual systems or whatever, our sensory systems as reality, but those are just a slice of what's actually happening in the physical world. And when we compare ourselves to other animals, that's what I think is pretty interesting. But then you start thinking about, okay, well, how does this work on a larger scale? Or like think about aliens and like how aliens might work. There's all sorts of documentaries on, actually, I just think I saw something recently, like on other planets' animals, like how they could develop. But it's just weird to think about that. What we tend to think about as like, I guess what I'm saying here is that when we think about our perception, what it really is just a slice of what's really happening out there. And those perceptions, they can be warped. They're not perfect. They're they can be duped. So we're gonna take a look at. We're gonna try a couple experiments with that today. I've never tried these experiments before, but I thought it'd be kind of fun to try it out. So let's give it a shot. So a couple announcements before we get into this. Oh, and then so what we're gonna be talking about today is a well, I'll talk about what we're talking about. First thing I'm going to do is talk about announcements here. So homeworks 4 and 5 finally went up. Yay or boo, depending on how you feel about this. That we're finally getting those homeworks up. So homeworks 4 and 5, which is the remaining decibel stuff, is 4, and then 5 is the stuff we went over last week. So so there's going to be due a week from yesterday. So they went up yesterday. They'll be due a week from yesterday. The decibel one has a couple more decibel questions in there that are going to be a little more mathy. But that's the end of it. So you don't have to worry about that so much. And then the stuff we went over last week is more about like the ossicles and the roles of the hearing and that kind of stuff. So it's a little bit more not math. so that's a good thing. We will be doing some more of the Fletcher-Munson curves. I don't think I added those in. Oh yeah, there are Fletcher-Munson curves in there. So some of the fawns and phone stuff. So yeah, so that's going to be due a week from today. So they shouldn't take you too long. The homework 4 might be a little bit, because it's still got a little bit of that math in there. And I apologize for the drudgery that the math brings, but once you get the hang of it, it's good practice and it's good to know, because this is stuff that beyond this in your audio engineering life, that if you have the skills to do this, it's like magic. You have so much more power over all the other engineers that you work with. So cool stuff. All right, so what we're gonna do this today. We're gonna try and wrap up all the stuff on the hearing system and human perception. There's a lot of stuff in the chapter that we're not gonna actually hit on. So I'm only going to quiz you on the stuff that I'm actually talking about in class today and the stuff we went over last class. I'm not going to expect that you learn the stuff out of the book that we didn't cover, because there's some stuff in there and it's pretty confusing. But if you reread it, if you like read it, listen to this lecture, and then you go back and read it a couple more times, maybe give it like some time and go back and read it again later, like next year. The more it'll start to sink in and make sense, and it's pretty fascinating stuff. But let's forge on here. So yeah, this idea of perception versus physical localization binaural hearing. This is what I want to spend a ton of time. Like I want to spend most of the class on this stuff today. Then we have these other kind of laws right here, hearing loss and tinnitus or tinnitus. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we cruise along here. So let's get into it. Yes. So pitch versus frequency. So this is where we left off talking about this idea last time. So frequency is the absolute. It's what's really happening. So when we say 200 hertz, we're saying that some sine wave is like passing through or it could be some complex wave, is repeating itself periodically at 200 hertz. So when I say periodic, it means repeating. So it's something that repeats itself over and over. And so for something to have a sense of pitch or a sense of tone, you have to have something that repeats itself. So we can have stuff that's atonal. So you think about something like a crash cymbal, or I don't know. I'm just trying to think of like things that make noise that don't have a sense of pitch. They don't have a sense of tone to them. Those are things that are going to have, of course, they're vibrating the waves and they're moving the air, but they're not doing anything periodically, meaning they're not doing anything that repeats itself. And so therefore they're not going to give a sense of pitch. But when we do have something that repeats itself and it gives us a sense of pitch. So pitch is this kind of funky thing in our human brain. So pitch is perceived frequency. But it's like, we hear about things like people having perfect pitch, and there are people with perfect pitch. I've worked with a guy who worked with perfect pitch. Actually, that same guy I was talking about, I think from last Tuesday, when I was saying he was the guy that would do like sit at the console and do this sort of thing. He was actually had perfect pitch, and I'd never really worked. He was a bit of a savant. It was pretty interesting. He had he had a way of understanding and synesthete. Like he was a bit of a synesthete. He could see the colors of the sounds, and that fed into his perfect sense of perfect pitch. But it was pretty interesting to work with him. But when we talk about this idea of perfect pitch, so most of us aren't actually as good as pitch as we think we are, especially even if we're good musicians. We like to think that we have pretty good pitch. We have good relative pitch, but good absolute pitch is really difficult for us to pick out. And so when you sit there, and that's why we always have like a tuning, and then you use that as your reference. And then once you have a reference, being able to go off your reference pitch, we're pretty good, especially as trained musicians, we're pretty good at picking out pitch relative to a foundation. But if you had no single centering point, no like tuning fork or tuning pipe or any of that kind of stuff, to sit there and play a note and go, oh, that's a like a C2 or a G3. or G sharp. You know, that's like yeah, G sharp. That's going to be really difficult to just pull out of the air. So we like to, like, most of us tend to think we have an inflated sense of pitch, that we think we're better than we are. But anyway, the idea is that we have this thing we call these mels. So 1,000 mels goes with 1,000 hertz at 60 dB SPL. That was just like, this is like a made up thing. But we can discern about 1,400 steps and about 280 steps intensity. And this is what we went over last time. So what we can see here is that as pitch goes up, we have our mels, and then we have our frequency down here. So they just kind of divide these mels up right here. And like, it should be 1,500 to 1,500, but it turns out it's not quite. Like, our pitch shifts a little bit, and of course amplitude affects that too. So we can see that we have this weird kind of craziness happening. So I want to try this one. So as for pitch goes down, as level increases, for pitch for high frequencies, pitch goes up as level increases. So let's try this out. I'm gonna try this. Let's do this real quick. So I'm gonna do and then just as an example with this, let's just do something like this. Let's do 200. And let me do gain. And let's do easy duck. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a sine wave here with a pitch. And I did it at 200 hertz just as an example. Let me make sure that I have this set up for zoom. Cool. You hearing that? Cool. Okay. So what I'm going to do, what is that, 10 minus 10? Let's turn it off for a second. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do a quick thing. I'm going to change the volume on this thing quickly. So I'm going to do minus 10. And let me find another one that's like, all right, minus 40. So what's going to happen here is I'm going to toggle back and forth between the two of these. Turn it on. Okay. That might be a little too quiet. Let's go down to minus 30. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to play it loud for a second. I want you to center in on that pitch, and then I'm going to drop the gain on it. And when I drop the gain on it, you're going to see if does it sound perceptually, does it sound the same, or does it sound a little bit different? I don't know. For me, it sounds like when it gets quieter, the pitch went up a little bit for me. Yeah. So for me, it feels like the pitch goes up when it gets quieter. And I think that goes opposite here. For low frequencies, pitch goes down as level increases. That's opposite. I would say that. So I'm perceiving this a little bit different. Let's try it with a 2,000 hertz. Or let's go 5,000 hertz. It's going to be a little piercing, so apologize. So hopefully have your gain, like, watch. I'll bring it up slowly. Ooh-wee. For me, his gain goes up, pitch goes up. So this one seems to hold true for me, but this one seems opposite for me. Interesting. Let's try this one real quick here. Well, when I was bringing the gain up, I felt like it went up. Oh, wait, you may be right. Oh, yeah. Pitch goes down as level increases. No, when I made it quieter, it felt like the pitch went up. So when I say for low frequencies, pitch goes down as level increases. So pitch went up for me. Oh, maybe you're right. Yeah. Okay. It makes my brain hurt. All right, let's try this. Let's try this one example out right here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do this. This is from the book. This experiment that I did here is in 318. I think I'm supposed to do these in different ears. I can't remember if I'm supposed to do them in separate ears or same ear. I think I do them in separate ears. Let's try that. Let's do... and what I'm going to do... gotta put my other headphone in. So what happens? Now, so it says as level increases, they perceptually become 150 and 300 hertz. But I'm not getting that. Like it's they still have that warble to them, even at higher gains. Yeah, so maybe it does. Yeah, it does. It does. This kind of work in there, but interesting. But the whole point here, though, and like all these cool little like experiments are fun. But the underlying point of all this is that what we perceive and what physically there are two different things. So our perception is fallible, and we can play on that a lot. Okay, the other thing that we have here is what's called the false or missing fundamental. Actually, I will demonstrate this one really quick here. So if I were to, for instance, just create, let's create an additive synthesizer real quick. So I'm just going to do something really simple. Let's do 100 hertz, 200 hertz. What I'm going to do, let's delete this, go to this. I should have had this set up ahead of time, but let's go like this. And let's do 6 harmonics real quick. So this is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. So what I'm doing is I'm setting up just a super simple additive synthesizer. So these are all the harmonics. So this is their integer multiples of the fundamental. This is the fundamental right here. And what I'm going to do is let's feed all these in. The left and the right. Cool. All right. And what I'm going to do is bring all the gain on these down. Now I'm going to create a complex tone. All right, so I created right there. I've got 6 harmonics right there, and I've created like a harmonic. Like basically, I've created something that has these are the relative amplitude of the harmonics right there to give it a certain complex tone, a timbre. And what I'm going to do here is I want you to like now when you heard them coming in, you could hear wah 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 wah. You heard them coming in, and now I'm just going to turn this on, and I want you to just center on like the pitch and hear the pitch of this thing. Let's do it like this. Cool. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the fundamental. So we know that this is basically, these are integer multiples of the fundamental. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out this, the fundamental. So if you were to say this is a 100 hertz tone that is a complex tone that's being cycled over, like if you look at the waveform, it cycles we could look at that waveform and it's cycling at 100 hertz, 100 times per second, and it gives us this quality of sound. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take out the fundamental. I'm going to remove this one. I'm going to turn it all the way off. And I want to see, does the pitch change, or in other words, does the note change, or does just the timbre change? So let's try this. Did the note change, or just did the pitch change or not? What's up? The timbre changed, but the pitch did not. It still sounds like a 100 hertz tone. It just sounds like a thinner 100 hertz tone. So we could say that it got quieter, but it's the interesting thing with that. So what we call that the false fundamental. So, and I want to spend more time on it. So if you play a series of harmonics, integer multiple, whoops, but remove the fundamental, you still perceive the original pitch. So I use this technique a lot in mastering. So let's take an example. So maybe you're doing a hip hop track, or a rap track, and it's got a lot of huge bass. And the thing is, you want people to be able to play this like on their little UE booms, right? Like you're gonna take this to the park, and you want to listen on your boom, or whatever, your little Bluetooth speaker. And so those little Bluetooth speakers, they can't put out a lot of bass. So the problem with that is that, so if you want to have that, and so maybe this kick goes woof, 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 woof. You got some heavy beat going on down there, but but it doesn't have a lot of like high frequency content. So the problem is that little tiny speaker, it's playing, it's trying its best. This little tiny speaker is moving, it's trying to move out the air, but it's not doing a very good job of it. And therefore the result is it doesn't translate. So basically you can't hear it. So what we can do is, if I add harmonics, and so there's like, you can use like a harmonic exciter on the kick drum. What it's going to do is it's going to add harmonics of that kick drum into up into the upper range, and your brain is able to fill in. So even if I remove those low frequencies, your brain can hear the high frequency, the higher harmonics, and it's able to fill that in on the low frequencies and go, oh, I can actually hear the low frequencies here. And so your brain perceives them, even though they don't exist. You hear that low frequency kick drum, and your brain goes, "Oh yeah, I hear a low kick." But it's not like it feels. It's not like chest thumping or anything like that. But your brain is able to fill that in, and so this is a real trick that I use. Well, I mean, it depends on the mastering project, but this is a technique, and I can also use it in recording and mixing as well. So this is a trick that if you want to try to like fill in the spectrum, and so spectrum. Spectral exciters can do some pretty neat stuff like this. It basically allows it to fill in the spectrum without adding more amplitude. So we'll talk more about this in critical listening next year, and also you probably talk about this a little bit in mastering, but this is one of those tricks that I use quite a bit. But it also shows up in other areas like the timpani. So a timpani, timpani has a pitch to it, like the timpani drum, the kettle drum. And so when you pitch it, but basically what the pitch that it's playing doesn't actually, the drum head isn't actually moving in that frequency. It's only playing the harmonic series of those overtones. And then it gives you, the result is that your brain perceives it as this lower frequency that doesn't actually exist. It's pretty interesting. Or also, this also happens with telephones. So our more modern telephones have pretty good mics and pretty good bandwidth on them. But if you think about the old school analog telephones, they have a very, very narrow bandwidth. We call it a bandpass filter. And this is a result of like going way back into the telegraph days, and they turned telegraphs into telephones. And the original analog technology was pretty band limited. And so it basically couldn't do low frequencies, couldn't do high frequencies. And so in fact, if you want to give it that telephone effect, that lo-fi effect, what you do is you just bandpass. You just you like bandpass. You cut out all the lows, cut out all the highs, and center it around 2 kilohertz, and you're going to get that that low telephone effect if you want. So, but the interesting thing is, if we think about the human voice, and we'll talk about this next class, is that the human voice, say for a male, is around about 100 hertz for the fundamental for the human voice. Yet telephones can't even play 100 hertz. It can't, and for a female, it's going to be around 200 hertz more or less, and a young child is going to be around 300 hertz. And these are of course generalizations. We're all built different, and it runs the spectrum right there. But generally speaking, that's kind of the case. And so if I want to play between 100 and 200 hertz as my fundamental, that the telephone can't even play those low frequencies. Yet when you're talking on the telephone, you can understand what the person on the other line, on the end of the line, is saying. And that's because your brain is able to fill in those low frequencies based off the harmonics of our voice. And our voice has a ton of harmonics. And so therefore, if I have all those harmonics, even if I delete the fundamental, I can fill that in. So again, we call that the false fundamental. It's pretty cool. It's a pretty neat technique, but we can use it in mastering, we can use it in mixing, but we can also use it in technology and telephones and all sorts of stuff. Pretty cool stuff. So, cool. All right. So let's keep going on here. So timbre versus spectrum wave shape. This is like, I'm just going to talk about this. We're not doing a demo on this one right here, but timbre is perceived wave shape. We've spent some time on this before. So the wave shape is what gives rise to the sound. So like two sources of the same pitch can sound very different. So like if I were to sit there and I was playing a trumpet, an A on a trumpet, and then I was able to sing an A, with your eyes closed, you'd easily be able to go, yes, that's a trumpet, and yes, that's Merkel singing really, really poorly. Like that, you could definitely tell the difference between the two of those. Well, why? They're both an A. Yeah. So why are we able to discern the difference between it? What's the difference between a trumpet and a voice, or a piano or a harp? And the result is because even though they're playing, like we'll say middle C, just because actually let's do an A220. So an A220, it means that it's cycling at 220 hertz. but the actual wave shape is different between those two different sound sources that are repeating at 200 hertz. And what the difference between those wave shapes are is if we think about that, if we do the Fourier analysis of it, it's the relative amplitudes of the harmonics. So actually going back to this demonstration I was doing right here, we could say that like, I'm not going to do it, but like this, if this was this could be a trumpet, and maybe that's a voice. Obviously that's not quite, that's there's more to it than just timbre. Well, so okay, what timbre is, we can say it is basically the relative of the amplitude of the harmonics are different. Again, it's more complex than that, but that's the basic idea, is that the relative amplitudes of the harmonics are going to give rise to a different wave shape, which give us a different timbre. So, and when I say it's like this is simplified, the reason it's different. So, like if I'm going you can hear my voice is wavering a little bit, and there's some noise in there. There's some other stuff that are happening that are changing. And if I was doing the same thing on a trumpet, it's going to have some variation that happens when I'm holding it with my embouchure, with the way my lips are vibrating. It's not going to be completely perfectly constant, so it changes in time. And so it's like the relative amplitudes are changing just a little bit dynamically, and that's what's going to give us that realism. And then also there's things like the attack and the decay and the sustain and the release, all that kind of stuff are also parts of it as well. Beyond the scope of what we want to talk about in this class right now, but I think it's fascinating stuff when we get into synthesis. So, but what we really what I want to say here, this is the important thing: the relative amplitude of the harmonics are different. So and we can see that in a spectrum. We're going to spend a lot of time next class when we talk about human voice, talking about spectrum next class, and we're going to see a lot more of this coming up. So, but that's what, or like when I say I have two different people. So maybe I have, like, you're in a choir, for instance, and I have person A and person B. They're both singing A220, but yet the person that's singing this person sounds different than this person. And that's because the vocal tract is shaped different. All these different kind of things, their shape, the way that they sing, the way that they're holding themselves, the rate they're expelling their breath, those are all going to feed into the different changes in timbre, which are the relative amplitude of the harmonics. And so they're going to give us, the person A is going to have a different timbre than person B, even though they're singing the same pitch. So, but again, timbre is what we perceive. Spectrum is the actual wave shape. So timbre is what we also say, like I'll use the term quality of sound. And again, when we get into critical listening, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about this, like describing what stuff sounds like. And it's weird because the English language is not very good at describing sound. So when we say something's warm, something's cold, something's bright, something's harsh, something's edgy, like those are all like weird descriptors for sound, but yet we know what they mean. So we'll talk more about that. That's another class. Yeah. Right. Yeah. If you're listening to a trombone with a trombone without the attack, like brass instruments. Yeah. So just to repeat, so for the recording, when you cut off the attack of a sound source, it's very hard for our brain to actually like figure out what that sound is, because the attack has so much to do with triggering on how it works. And so when we think about something like a bell or a chime or let's use a trombone for an example. If you start playing on a trombone, when you start vibrating your lips, it takes a bit of time to get that instrument to actually start resonating. So you have to overblow a little bit and to spike the instrument to get it to like into resonance. And the result is your brain you've learned over your lifetime to understand what a brass instrument sounds like. So when somebody starts playing a trumpet or a trombone or tuba or French horn, that attack has that characteristic of what a brass instrument does. And then you're like, go brass instrument, and then you hear the pitch after that. But yeah, you're right. Or a human voice or a piano or any of this stuff, if you take off the attack, it's bizarre how weird that sounds like. And I try it. Grab some samples, throw them into your DAW, and chop off the transient, and then even just set up a loop and loop the center of a section, and it sounds almost like a synthesizer. It's very strange. Yeah, it's a very cool effect. Okay, so here's what I want to spend a lot of time on today. This is because I think this stuff is fascinating, and this is like this. I don't know. This explains a lot of things about how we function in the real world. So I can't do this experiment right now because we're virtually right now, but like if you were what I mean by localization of binaural hearing. So localization means your ability to figure out where something is in three-dimensional space. So if you sit there and you close your eyes, so like next time, actually it's a super nice day outside today. I hope you get outside at some point today. You don't have to go to the park or anything like that, but go outside at some point today. Just go outside, sit down, and close your eyes and start to map out the world in 3D with your eyes shut and start listening. And the term for this is like active listening, where we're listening for the sake of listening, and that's what we're drilling down. Sit outside, bask in the sun after this class if you have a couple minutes, and I want you to start to like listen and just listen to where sounds are coming from. You have the din of wherever. I mean, maybe if you're in the mountains, cool, but like I'm here down in downtown Denver, pretty much. And so if I go outside, you're going to hear the din of the city, just the kind of the overall just noise of the city. But then you're going to have like cars driving by. You're going to have birds chirping. You're going to have like people, like pedestrians walking by that are talking. And but if you close your eyes and hold your head still and just try to like visualize the world and start mapping something out. And so like let's use a bird as an example. So if you're sitting near a tree and a bird lands into the tree and is chirping or singing, that you sit there and you can figure out, even without moving your head, even without your eyesight or without anything, you can be like, okay, that bird is about 4 meters away up to my upper right there. And I can tell that I can tell the distance. And that's an amazing feat that you're able to localize. Basically, you're able to figure out where stuff is in 3D space we're used to using our eyes. But if you close your eyes, we're able to localize where something is in three-dimensional space. So I work in 3D audio. So like basically the way we define that is like azimuth, elevation, and distance. So azimuth is like the angle, like this angle. Elevation is this angle. And then distance is how far away it is. But you could just figure out where that is with your eyes shut. It's like it's like radar almost, right? And for bats, that is exactly how they work. They use echolocation. But for us, we can localize and we can figure out very effectively where something is coming in from 3D space. So what we want to do right for now is to deconstruct how that actually happens. And the reason I think this is really like important, not just because of like it's a neat biological function, but because this is the bleeding edge, not say bleeding edge, we'll say it's cutting edge technology, what's happening right now. Because these right here, this, my friends, is the future of surround sound. So how do we do surround sound on headphones? And the answer is we're pretty good at it now. We're getting better at it, but we're getting good at it, but we're about to get really good about this in like the next, I don't know, give it 2 more years and things are going to be insane. It's going to be crazy with the advent of VR. Well, we'll talk more about that here in a little bit. So let's talk about binaural hearing. So first, to get to that point, let's talk about how this works. So let's think about how sound is coming in. So again, we're like, just to like step back for one moment, we have 2 ears on the sides of our heads, and with 2 ears, we're able to figure out where stuff is coming in three-dimensional space. So let's talk about how that works. So the first thing we want to do is we have sound that comes in, and it's going to come in, and it's going to come in our ear. And so sound coming directly from in front of the ear at the ear canal opening. So, and I don't know if this means in front this way or if it means in front this way. I think it means in front this way right here. So what happens is if I have something that what we're going to do is we're going to look at one ear first, and then we're going to combine the 2 of these. So if we're looking at one ear, as the sound comes in, some of it's going to wrap around, diffract around inside of my ear and go down into my ear canal. Some of it's going to reflect off of these little curves, bumps, and bit here, and they're going to create reflections. And when those reflections, they're going to have certain areas of constructive interference and certain areas of destructive interference. So in other constructive interference is where they sum together and they get loud, and other areas where they're gonna be opposite phase and going to cancel each other out based off of time delay. And what we do is we call this the transfer function. So the transfer function is basically your pinna right here is gonna change the frequency response as it gets to your ear. And so this is what we have right here. And so we can see this humongous. So this is right here. We say relative sound pressure level dB. So when we say relative, so this means it's nothing. So what we're hearing is what's actually playing. But then we see that it bumps down here and that we see a huge bump over here. So this is right here. This is an effect of the length of the ear canal. So this is our ear canal, acts as a pipe closed at one end. And this is the quarter wavelength. The quarter wavelength is this resonance right here. So our ear resonates at around 3,000, 4,000 hertz right here. So therefore, we're very sensitive. We have essentially, by the fact that we have our ear canal is a tube, gives us something like a whatever 18 dB or a 17 dB boost of gain by hearing that. And this again, this is important because this is our articulation. This is a human voice range right here. So it's articulation range right here. So this is why like this is a very important region for us because this correlates to the human voice. So this is what boosts up here. And then we see that it drops down really far down and comes back up here. So we can say this is probably a region of destructive interference and destructive interference. And we have some constructive, well, this is the tube, but we can see that's not perfectly flat right here. So anyway, this is what we call the transfer function. So the pinna is able to do this. And now if I were to move this thing, if I were to move this around, what's going to be happening is, so sound coming from directly in front at the tympanic membrane. This is directly pulled from the book, but I don't remember. I'm not quite sure what that means right there. But we can see, if I go back and forth between the two of these, we see that the shape changes dramatically, say around 5 kilohertz. So 5 kilohertz, this one's at plus 12. And at this one, at 5 kilohertz, it's at 0. So it's a 12 dB drop right there. And that's a result of, and I don't know exactly where they're positioning these things. That's less important than understanding that by the virtue of moving the sound source around, it's going to drop. It's going to change this. And we can see we have a massive drop at 10K right here. So what is happening is our brain goes over, as we go through life, our brain goes, okay, based off of where I know this is where this is, and I know where this is, and of course there's going to be some transition in between the two of those, that your brain starts to figure out that this frequency response correlates to where that position is. So, and we're just talking about one ear right here, but what we say again, this is the transfer function. So the transfer function changes as we move stuff around. It's going to change, and our brain is going to be able to go, oh, I can tell where that's coming from, or that's part of where it's coming from. There's more to it than that. So that's the first part of the puzzle right there. So pretty fascinating stuff. So yeah, that's our first bit. So that's what these are right here. And the thing is, so like, yes, I think somebody asked the question is like, if I get some piercings or if I change something, but even right now, like if I change the shape of my ear and I'm talking, like, listen, like it's kind of hard to do it right now, but like, especially if you're wearing headphones, you can't really do this. If you're working on speakers, it works. But if you change the shape of your ear, like experiment with that. And you're like, yeah, you can hear stuff change. It's not like you're like, if I change the shape of my ear, all of a sudden I can't figure out which way's up and which way's down, and now all things are crazy. You can figure it out, and your brain is adaptable, and over time it'll figure it out. And like I kind of like joked about it, but like if you Van Gogh and cut your ear off, and or I had Mike Tyson bite your ear off, like you'll still be able to you'll get through life just fine. Your localization may not be as good. And it would be interesting to see, like, if you were to do prosthetic ears, like make something really, really complex shape that your brain could adapt to that. I wonder if you could like increase your localization, your 3D like ability to localize where something is if you had like different shaped ears. But you're gonna get a lot if you change the shape of your ears dramatically, you're gonna get a lot of questions. So I don't know, like you're gonna get a whole bunch of questions. So and you're gonna get tired of answering those questions. Maybe you won't, but it's up to you. But I do think it's interesting. Probably not so much on your lobes. I don't think your lobes actually change very much. So if you're doing stretches or wearing earrings or that kind of stuff, I don't think it changes stuff that much. But again, it doesn't. This is just one part of the equation here. So let's move up to this another one. This stuff is what you'll see a lot of. This is what we call HRTF, head-related transfer functions. This is a very big deal right here. So this is called Fritz right here. So this is a mic by Neumann. It's like the KS100, KSM 100. No, it's not KSM. That's Shure mics. It's like the K100 or it's like something 100. I can't remember what the model of this thing is, but essentially this is a binaural microphone. And the idea behind this thing right here is if I were to create a shape of a head and I put these ears with microphones inside the ears and I put this out, that I create a binaural recording, what it's going to do is all these things that are going to come in, the shape of the pinna and the time delay and gain and phase shift between these two microphones would emulate the way a human hears this. And so this is a really popular thing to do. It's called binaural recording. And you can go through and you can set this up like at a concert, or you just go outside and set this up. And if you play it back on headphones, it gives a very realistic impression of three-dimensional space. So like if you listen to a classical recording, and you can go like find these, they're all over the place. Like I think NPR has a whole bunch of these, like has a whole library on, I don't know where they are. They might be even on SoundCloud, but you can go listen to binaural recordings. But just Google binaural recordings. It's pretty fun to listen to it. And actually, one of the more famous ones is like look up Virtual Barber, and basically what it does is they did this and they had somebody with clippers, walk up behind you, and basically it sounds like you're about to get clippers in the back of your head, and it almost makes you flinch every single time. It's really funny. So you can try it out. But this only works if you're wearing headphones, because if you're doing this with speakers, it doesn't work. It's lost, and we'll talk about that here in just a minute. But this is an example of binaural recording. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about the trick on how this thing works here. So this is really important. What I want you to understand right here, how we localize. So say for instance, I have something coming off from my right side. And let's say I have a high frequency coming off. So what do I mean by high frequency? Let's use 5 kilohertz just as an example. 5, 10 kilohertz, something along those lines. As that sound comes along and it's going to hit this ear, it's going to hit this ear, and what ends up happening is it's going to be louder in this ear than it is in this ear, because my head is essentially casts an acoustic shadow. And the result is it's going to be louder in this ear than it is in this ear. So therefore, my brain goes, hey, it's over here. Because if it's louder on this side than it is on this side, that to my brain says, yes, it's over here. And so therefore, of course, that's an example right there. And so what we do there is we call it ILD, interaural level difference. So interaural, aural right here means AUARAL. So oral, ORAL is mouth. AUARAL is hearing. So interaural level difference. So we localize high frequencies with interaural level difference. We localize low frequencies with interaural phase or time difference. And I have some slides to explain this out here. But basically, with low frequencies, we're going to talk about diffraction coming up. We're a little ahead right now, but diffraction means sounds can wrap around something. So low frequencies, like your head basically is about has a wavelength. If you measure your V equals F lambda, and I measure this length right here, this is about a 2 kilohertz wavelength right there. 17.2 centimeters is about the size of your head. So that means any frequency lower than 2000 hertz is going to wrap around your head. And the result is, as it wraps around your head, think about it like if I have a wave, for instance, and I'm going to use this example later too, but if I have a giant, let's just use it. This is a kind of a weird example, but if I'm standing at the beach, I'm standing and a wave comes and hits me. That wave is gonna wrap around me and keep on going like I didn't even exist. Well, the same thing happens with low frequencies. With low frequencies, the low frequency is going to wrap around you and keep persisting as if you didn't even exist. So the result is that the level difference between my right ear and my left ear is exactly the same. So if a sound's coming off from my right, a low frequency, say 50 hertz, coming along, it's going to hit this side of my head and it's going to wrap around and it's going to hit this side of my head too. And therefore, the result is it's going to sound equally loud in both ears. And so therefore, I can't use interaural level difference to localize low frequencies. So the way I do that is I use interaural phase or time difference. It takes time for it to go from here to wrap around to here. And the result is a time shift between the two of these, and it's a phase shift. And that's how your brain locks onto that. So, and that's of course, when we hear sounds are usually complex. So if I hear a kick drum, for instance, a kick drum is going to have low frequencies and it's going to have high frequencies. So I'm going to use both of these at the same time for a kick drum. So if I have a kick drum coming off from my right side over here, or bass guitar or something like that, something with low and high frequencies, we're going to be using both of these at the exact same time. So around 2 kilohertz is the threshold for the difference between high and low frequencies, which is the wavelength of the size of our heads. Cool. So let's look at this right here. So if I have something going along here, so here's what I left. So what I have here is I have a sound coming off from my left. It's going to hit my left ear. So this is interaural time difference. It hits my left ear right here first, and then you can kind of see that I have a slight time delay right here. And because I have a slight time delay, it results in a phase shift between the two of these right here. So the time delay results in a phase shift. And so in this case, we could say that, it's like a 20-degree phase shift or something like that. I don't have it mapped out right there, but we could say that basically we have a phase shift here. So, and this is gonna be interesting as we go lower and lower frequency. Funny things are gonna start happening here. So we're gonna come back to this in a minute. But I just really want to the thing I want you to remember is interaural time difference, ITD, for low frequencies, ILD, interaural level differences for high frequencies. So if we look at interaural level difference right here, so we have a sound source coming along here, it moves along. And then it wraps, because we cast an acoustic shadow right here, that it's going to be louder in this ear than it is going to be in this ear over here. So how do we tell if something is that's a pretty extreme example. What if something is straight in front of us? Well, if something's directly in front of us, we have neither a time difference or a level difference between both ears because it's going to hit both ears at the exact same time and the exact same amplitude. So how are we able to tell where something is? So, well, I mean, like, or what if it's something's 45, like in this like thing here? What if something's 45 degrees off here? Well, with a combination of both our pinna and our interaural level difference and our interaural time difference, all of those summed up are going to shift over here, and your brain is going to go, "Yep, it's coming up 45 degrees off over here in this axis right here." But again, what if so again, it's a kind of the combination of those three things. So interaural level difference, interaural time difference, and transfer functions from your pinna. Those are what are going to be kind of our three primary kind of factors for localizing something is in 3D space. So and it's really kind of like magical how good this is. So and what's also interesting is like, so if you lock onto something that's very difficult to localize, like a fun experiment to do is if you ask, so when I told you to sit down and close your eyes and try and localize something, what I want you to do is like take a sound source, maybe a buzzer or something like, and ask your friend or somebody that you know, like to sit down and localize, like say, point to where something is coming in 3D space. And what they'll do is they close their eyes and they'll go like this. They move their head around. And what they're doing is like if that source is stationary, what they're doing is they're inducing interaural level differences, interaural time differences, and also using their pinna as a filter to like lock onto something. If you watch somebody, if they're trying to localize something like with like something that's kind of hard to lock onto, maybe it's a very narrow band frequency stuff, like pure tones are very difficult to localize. So if you play, say, something like an 8,000 hertz, and I just play an 8,000 hertz out of a speaker and ask someone to close their eyes and ask them where they're coming from, they're gonna go like this. They're gonna move their head around, and what they're doing is they're locking in on that. So pretty interesting stuff. And I think I mentioned this last time. Things like animals. So like our pinna is fixed, but if you what I think is interesting is you like look at a horse or cats or like deer or something like that, where they can actually like rotate their ears, and so they can actually, instead of rotating their head, they can rotate their ears, and they can actually like lock onto stuff very good. I mean, our hearing is good. Our eyesight's really good, but our hearing is okay compared to the rest of the animal kingdom. And so they're going to use like their ears to like lock in on something. And you know, even things like dogs will perk up and change the shape. They can dynamically change the shape of their pinna to lock onto sounds. Pretty fascinating stuff. I think that's really neat. So, but yeah, if you like move stuff around, you can localize in on this stuff. So there's this other thing that like looking at this, so loss of low frequency localization. So interaural time difference results in a phase shift. I just kind of showed that slide a second ago. But as frequency goes down, phase shift gets less, the relative phase shift gets less and less. So below 80 hertz, the phase shift becomes indiscernible. So we can no longer localize the sounds of low frequencies. This is why we can put subwoofers anywhere in the room. So you'll see that sometimes like with a 5.1 system or maybe some of these satellite systems. I remember when I was a kid, like when I saw a Bose system for the first time, they had these little tiny satellite speakers. And then what they did is they put the subwoofer over in the corner, and it's like bumping. And you're like, dude, there's no way that this sound is coming from these little tiny speakers. You're like, it's not. It's because they actually have the low frequencies coming out of the subwoofer over in the corner, but the high frequencies are coming out from these. Because you can localize the high frequencies really well, but you can't localize the low frequencies really well. And so again, below 80 hertz, you can put the subwoofer nearly anywhere else in the room. And that's, if we look at this, it's because as the phase shift gets, as the wavelength, so like this would be the time shift between here. And this time shift is going to be a result of, because the speed of sound, the time it takes for here, because that's not very far for like, well, because that's wrap around my head, that it's going to have to wrap around my head, that time, that's about, I'm going to estimate, that's going to be about 1 millisecond. So it's about 1 millisecond per foot, or 1 foot per millisecond is about the speed of sound. So if there's about, we'll say if it's about a 1 foot for it to travel around here, it's not, it's less than that. But I'm just around. We'll say it's 1 millisecond. So 1 millisecond between delay from this one to this one. Now, as the frequencies go up, the phase shift, it gets less, is pretty stark. But as I stretch these waves out, the relative phase shift. So right now you could say this is like a 10-degree phase shift. As those wavelengths get longer and longer, because the frequency is going down, the wavelengths get longer. The relative phase shift gets less and less and less and less, to the point where your brain can't tell it. They pretty much look exactly the same to your brain, or sound exactly the same to your brain. And the result is I can't tell, I can't localize where that is. And so like if the mark of a good frequency is you can't tell where it's coming from. So if I were to play something like a 60 hertz tone out of a subwoofer and you close your eyes, you shouldn't be able to figure out where that's coming from. If you can figure out where it's coming from, that means it's playing some harmonics or some like it's like air pushing chuffing on the air because you can hear the air ports moving. That's a bad subwoofer. So that's what you're trying to do. And so like especially if you're dealing with like small computer systems, they have small subwoofers. Those subwoofers are going to cross over around like 200 or 300 hertz. So they're not true subwoofers. But what's also interesting, this is like we can no longer look at the sound. So the reason we can't do that is it's because it's a function of how far apart our ears are. So if you're say to look like something like an elephant, so an elephant has their ears very far apart. They can localize low frequencies far better than we can. So an elephant, like so, if I was playing a subwoofer, 60 hertz subwoofer in a room, I'm like I can't tell where that's coming from. But an elephant would be like, yeah, it's right there, because they're like their head is so huge that the phase shift still because their ears are so far apart that as that phase shift has to get really low before they lose localization. So therefore they can use like low frequencies for localization. But on the flip side, if we look at a mouse, so a mouse is so tiny, they're going to lose their localization, say at around 1,000 hertz, because they can't tell because their ears are so close together and their head is so tiny that they're going to lose their localization at like 1,000 hertz. And so, just kind of cool, interesting trivia right there. Um, there was one other thing I wanted to hit on that. Oh yeah. So so knowing what we know now, so with the combination of the pinna and with the pinna transfer function, and then also the interoral level differences and the interoral time differences, we map that out. We can give the impression, we can synthesize this. So one way we can get the we call binaural playback, like binaural means two ears. So binaural means that if I have a dummy head and I record it, it's going to record the time delay difference, the interoral level differences, interoral time differences, and the pinna effects to give us this impression that's baked in all those transfer functions. And so therefore it gives us three-dimensional sound with just over headphones. It's magic. It's pretty cool. But the cool thing is now we've mapped that stuff out and we know how to synthesize it. So now what I can do is I can take a sound source, and this is where we get into like the modern object-based mixing. So this is the bleeding edge of stuff right now. This is object-based mixing. So if you're working in say film and cinema or video games, that if you want sound to move around in 3D, what we can do is if I want the sound to come up from over here, maybe I put the voice up to my right, and I want my lead vocal for whatever instance I want my lead vocal to come up there. The computer I can model what the time difference would be and what the level difference would be, and also the effects of the pinna transfer functions to give you the impression that something is coming up over there. And so therefore we can synthesize this stuff in real time. And so this is like what's happening in video games. So like video games are synthesizing this stuff in real time, and these game audio engines are able to give you the impression of where things are coming from. So that's how we are able to do surround sound over headphones. And I was a real skeptic when I first saw this technology come out, like, I don't know, 15 years ago, not even now, 20 years ago. I started hearing about 3D audio on headphones and I was like, no way, that's so lame. And then I put it on, I was like, oh, it's real. and it's totally, it's badass. It really is pretty cool. So, oh yeah, go ahead. Yep. So they're just So they're basically modifying the frequencies using the pinna transfer functions and changing the interoral level difference and interoral time difference between the two of those to give you the impression. So it's a filter, and so it's just an algorithm. So these are codecs that you can download them off the internet right now. Resonance Audio, if you want to go play with this from Google, just released. There's a bunch of free ones. IEM tools and Sparta tools. They're all VSTs. You can just plug into your DAW and you can start messing around with this stuff. It's pretty cool. But now they're getting to the point where, like, I think Steinberg just came out with a thing. You take your phone. And so the weird part of this is we're all shaped, our heads are different, right? Your head is different than mine. And so my pin is shaped different than your pinna, and my head shape and all these kind of things are like slightly different. So what the kind of the bleeding edge of stuff right now is like if you can map your own head. And so basically you can take pictures of your ears and it'll create these transfer functions so that it's specific to your ears and it's custom done to you. They're called SOFA files. And basically it's creating this head related transfer function that's specific to you. And so doing like photogrammetry basically creates a 3D model of your head, and then it can create these models and it's very convincing. So that basically you're able to do 3D audio. And then that's one thing if you're watching whatever, like TV or your video games, because your heads are locked. But if now when we get into VR, if we put a VR and we put head trackers on there, now if I put so what I want it to do is I want this sound to sound like it's coming in front of me. So if I turn my head, I want it to sound like it stays in position right there. So what it's doing is, uh-huh, and it totally works. It's amazing. And so, yep. And so what they're doing is they'll like do it's head tracking. So basically, if I want that sound object to sound like it's fixed in like whatever, like the sound object is fixed in 3D space, that as I move my head, it's going to translate that and create that. And again, we expect that, but it's like it's pretty magical that when I turn my head, that it sounds like it's coming from over here, and when I turn it back, it stays like it's coming from in front of me. And so yeah, this is all done in real time, and it's amazing magic. It's not magical; it's just math, but it's pretty cool stuff. And so this is where things are happening. There's a lot of motion happening and stuff right now, and so part of you may be like glossing over, going, "Why is Merkle spending so much time talking about all this stuff?" The reason is because if you understand the power of all this stuff, you can appreciate it. So when you go in and start mixing in 3D, because that is the future of mixing, is in 3D now, that you can actually leverage and understand how this stuff works. It's really important to understand the underlying biology and physiology I guess it's more physiology and psychoacoustics to understand how to capitalize on the impression of moving stuff around in 3D. So the bottom line here is this is the future of surround sound right here. Like these speaker systems, surround has been around for a long time, and it's supposed to be this big revolutionary change in audio production. And for cinema and stuff, it's great. But like it never really took off in the home theater or like in home systems because it's so many wires, it's so complex, it doesn't work that well. And it's cool, but like the future of 3D audio is headphones. That's coming from somebody who builds big speaker arrays for doing 3D audio. So that's like there's other uses for it as well. But this is like how we're going to start getting surround sound. This is surround, and the modern surround is spatial audio. So that's what we call it, spatial audio. And spatial audio can be decoded to binaural, and I can't go on now. It's already 12. I have more stuff I got to get to, but I could go on and on and on and on about this stuff. But take the surround class; it's cool. Like we talk about that stuff in there a lot. So when you get to after mastering, you can take surround, and it's a cool class. Okay, so yeah, that's cool stuff. So let's move on. Let's talk about the law of what we call the law of the first wavefront here. So this is going to be some pretty interesting stuff here. So the law of first wavefront. So let's use an example here. I've got a room, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a person in a room, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a couple speaker or a trumpet here, and what it's going to do is it's going to start playing some sound. And when it plays some sound, the shortest distance right here from the trumpet to the person is a straight line, right? The shortest distance between two things is a straight line. Well, that also the shortest distance correlates also to the smallest time delay, because we know that it takes time for this to travel through the medium at 344 meters per second. That this is going to be the shortest time delay. There is a delay, but it's a short time delay. But then we're going to have a reflection that goes right here, and so what's going to happen here is that it's going to reflect off of here and come back here, and actually it's going to have a slight frequency shift because this is going to absorb. We're going to spend a lot more time talking about this later in the semester when we talk about reverberation, but it bounces here and it hits my ear, but it has a time delay because it went further distance. It has a time delay, but it's the same sound, but it's just delayed. Well, that can be a real problem. So what's going to happen? And then I've got another, whoops, sorry, went backwards. And then I have another one that hits the ceiling here, and then I have another one that hits back here. So that's gonna do two bounces, and it's gonna be a longer delay. And then of course it's gonna do all sorts of them around there. Well, what we can say is that the sound that arrives first, the shortest distance, gives the direction of the sound listener receiver. All reflections are discarded for localization. So this is a good thing, but still counts for spaciousness and reverb. We're going to talk more about this a lot when we get to reverb in this class. But for right now, what I want to talk about is this disregarding of information. So even though I got a time delay to it, your brain will say, I'm disregarding that reflection. It still feeds in and gives you a sense of space, but I can still tell where that's coming from. So even if I'm in a loud, reverberant room and I have somebody talking to me, I can figure out where they're coming from based off of this, because your brain disregards all of the delayed information. And so we call this the law of the first wavefront. And so this is really important, because what I don't want to do is, if I have a person talking to me and then they're standing next to a brick wall, I don't want them to think, I don't want the audio image to feel like it's shifted to the wall. I want to be able to lock on to where they're coming from, where they actually are. So, and that's critically important just from like, a biological and evolutionary standpoint. Is just I want to be able to localize where stuff is in 3D space without having to mess around. Because if I were distracted by the reflections, no, I'm not talking about an echo. Like an echo is when we have something that's like 200 milliseconds longer, where it's like a really long delay. We're talking like on the terms of like whatever milliseconds, on like 10 between 5 and 10 milliseconds. So a 5 and 10 millisecond delay, you won't even perceive where that delay is coming from. Your brain doesn't even exist to your brain. It's pretty interesting. So yeah, you have to like it's a pretty interesting effect. So on that note, we have this thing called the Fresnel effect. So what we can do is so that makes sense in a natural biological sense. But now what we want to do is if we bring this into the synthetic world, now we have electricity and speakers, we can do some bizarro stuff. So what I can do is I take two speakers and I delay one speaker and make one louder. Or sorry, if I delay one speaker, what happens, and this is the Haas effect, that your brain locks onto where the nearest sound comes from. But then what I can do is I can fade that one out and I still have this speaker over here playing, but your brain will still make it quieter. It doesn't fade all the way out. But if I make it quieter, your brain still thinks it's coming from over here, even though it's quieter than this speaker is over here, because this one was closer to you. And so therefore it's called the Fresnel effect. Basically, you still feel like it's coming from there. It's kind of like this, almost like the precedence effect there. And then we have this other here what we call the Haas or precedence effect. So with speakers, we can create false reflections in sound sources. So being further from one speaker will create a delay. So this is the same idea. So like if you're closer to one speaker, that basically your brain locks onto where all this is coming from. And so this is a real problem. So with stereo mixing. So the way we do something, if we want to give something, like say we're doing like a mixing a regular track and we want the vocals to come from the center. Well, to give something to come from the center, what I do is I play equal amplitudes out of the left and the right at the same time. And if you're sitting in dead stereo position, it creates what we call the phantom image. So the phantom image will come from, because it's hitting like equally on both sides, to our brain, it's going to sound like it's coming from in the middle. But if I move slightly off axis to the left or to the right, the vocals are going to move with that. So in other words, you have to be really careful about this. Like if I move over here, anything that was mono is going to come completely from the right speaker. And if I go over here, anything that's coming from both speakers is going to come completely, sound to my brain sound like it's completely coming from the left speaker. So the phantom image for doing stereo center is very, very sensitive. So this can create a real problem. So at the movie theater, what they do is, this is where the benefit of surround comes from. So they put dialogue in a center channel. So they anchor it to the center. So therefore, if I move off axis, the dialogue will still come from the center of the screen. Because if I have just a stereo image, if I'm just working in a stereo theater, for instance, and I'm sitting like off to the left, the image is going to be that the dialogue is coming from, anything mono is going to come all the way from the side of the speaker. And it's going to create a weird, where I see a talking head in the middle of the screen, but the voice is coming from over here. That's going to be really weird. So that's why, like in surround, like it's really important to anchor all the mono stuff in the center. And in fact, there's all sorts of cool things when you start adding a center speaker in there. Cool stuff happens with the center speaker. Once you start mixing in surround, you can never go back to stereo. Stereo sucks. Stereo is so boring. Like it feels so blah. Like I don't know. I can't stand. Like I listen to music all day on stereo. But once you start mixing in surround and you go back to stereo, you're like, this blows. Stereo sucks. Oops. So here's the Haas and the precedence effect. So here as a person with two speakers and off axis right here. So because the time delay is shorter here, that if this is the same thing as coming out of both speakers, it's going to 100% sound like it's coming from over here if I'm off axis. And it's very sensitive. And I encourage you to try this. If you're sitting in the studio where you're sitting dead center, play just something like spoken word or like something that's mono. Like just play some mono sounds coming out of just like a mono sound, and then just move your head to the left and to the right, and you'll hear the image completely shift back and forth. It's crazy. So cool. All right. Couple more things here I want to hit on. That we're going to wrap this up. So what we call the cocktail party effect. So let's take an example. Back when we used to be able to have gatherings, like in shows and stuff, we call this cocktail party. Back when we used to have cocktail parties, right? Like, because we do that all the time, right? I go to cocktail parties like once every 5 years. So, um, but like, they call it a cocktail party. But what they mean by a cocktail party is where you have a bunch of people sitting around just chatting, and then maybe you have music in the background too. And so we could just say a party effect. So that sounds like a party to me. So, so we call this the ability to distinguish and direct attention to one sound amid many. So let's take an example here. So say I'm with three friends, and so I'm having a conversation. We're sitting in like, we're two of them are facing this way, two of us are facing this way, and I'm able to talk to this person right here, and they're able to talk to each other across the way, and like I can hear them talking, but by me looking at that person, I'm able to listen to them directly, even though there's all the sound, and even if it's like even it's the same volume. So because I'm actually even closer to those two people that are on to my left and my right, they're probably even speaking louder. Yet I'm still able to understand what the person is directly across from me. I'm able to lock in and disregard all this other information. This is crazy insane. So like the fact that you're able to, and it turns out we actually use a lot of lip reading. Like that's part of our, like a lot of our stuff is lip reading. So when we switch over to masks, like when now during COVID, when everyone's wearing masks, it's a lot harder to understand people because you don't have the visual cue of what they're saying as well. So you have to rely on strictly audio, which is tough. But the fact that we have the ability to tune out stuff and listen to just one thing. So like for instance, I don't have time for it right now, but like if I were to play a tune and I go, listen to just the vocals or listen to just the snare drum, you can disregard the rest of the mix and listen to just the snare drum. Like you're like, yeah, I'm listening to snare drum. What's the big deal? You're like, no, that is signal processing wise, that's insanely complex. Computers have a very difficult time to doing this. So they're getting better with like machine learning and AI type stuff, but still like computers have a very difficult time to discern it. This is something that evolutionarily we've developed and we're very good at this sort of thing. So it's just pretty cool. So yeah, like works even better with localization. So this is why one reason why surround is so awesome. So, okay, I want to talk about a couple of things because we only have a few minutes here because I spent a lot of time there. I want to talk about this notion of hearing loss. This is a very big deal for me. So loss can be, we have two different kind of things that we happen with hearing loss. It can be short and loud or long and quieter. So we have, we're going to have age-related and environmentally related hearing loss here. So like if we look at here, we looked at these slides kind of last time. So this is what hair cells, the stereocilia, look like on the basilar membrane right here. This is after being exposed to loud, and I saw this. It makes me cry when I see this. But portion of like this is like basically they did this on a guinea pig. I think they blasted a poor guinea pig with a lot of sound and just destroyed them. It's really sad. I hate that stuff. But what we can see here is that all these hair cells are dead. They're gone. So this is like if you go to, they're exposed to 120 dB hair cell. So, or this is also like exposure to hearing loss right here. So exposure can happen. So when we're exposed to loud, so it can be long and quiet or short and loud. So this is right here. This is an audiogram of a mixing engineer after years of experience of being in the studio. So 0 dB means like, this is how much like they're not there. We see that we have some like attenuation here. It's like 15 dB, but we can see that around like, and this is like say the right ear is at minus 50 dB. If you remember, if you can appreciate what decibels are, that is insane. So this is around 2 to 4K, and this is because they've been probably listening to loud music for like in a control room, listening not even loud, but just moderate levels for most of their career. So this is a dangerous career, like for your hearing, especially because your job is to hear, right? So you have to take care of your ears. This is bad news. So this is like kind of the OSHA thing. So it's like if I listen to 85 dB SPL, I can be exposed for 16 hours of 85 dB SPL before things really start to go bad. But if I go to a show, say it's between 105 and 110, and I'm not wearing earplugs, 1 hour of a concert, and you've permanently ruined your hearing. For like, you've damaged your hearing for the rest of your life, and there's no coming back from that. And especially if you love music, like if you're in this room, you love music, that's a real problem. So I just want to. So I'm only going to say this like 15 minutes at 115. That's like you got 15 minutes and you got permanent hearing loss. Bad news. So you want to be mixing at, like 80 decibels probably at most. All right. So yes. So the thing is here is wearing earplugs. So I mean, like it's, oh, I just changed my pants, but I have earplugs in every single pair of pants that I own. I have earplugs around the house everywhere. I wear earplugs all the time, and they can, so earplugs drop the sound about 35 decibels. That's the foamy ones, the cheap foamy ones. It's about a 35 decibel. So if I'm at a 110 dB concert and it drop off 35 decibels, that puts me way down here. And so you're pretty much safe. You know, not forever, but you're pretty much safe. So earplugs are everything. Wear them, wear them, wear them, wear them, wear them, wear them, wear them. All right, here I'm gonna just show this thing right here. Yeah, it's fine. Every concert's gonna be about 100. Like a loud show is gonna be about 110 dB. Yeah, be between 100 and 110 dB. So yeah, you've got about an hour where before you cause all sorts of damage. So I would like give me like 2 seconds here, and we'll call this one. So this is like if you start as you get old, we all, this is just part of getting old. So we just like we move the high frequencies get quieter. So and it affects men more than women. So basically, what ends up happening is when it gets, it's not as if it gets quieter as you get older. Your high frequencies roll off, and the effect is that you can hear people talking, but you can't understand the articulation, because if we lose that 2 to 5 kilohertz range, then it sounds like, well, it sounds like all syllables, like Snoopy teacher. So a lot of times what you end up happening is, this is happening to my dad right now. He'll be like, we'll be at a restaurant and he can hear me speaking, but he can't understand what I'm saying because all the articulation, all the high frequency information is attenuated. And so therefore he's able to be like, I can't really hear what, like, he's like, I can hear you, but I can't understand what I'm saying. So, and you'll see this happen a lot with older people. They'll go, I'm sorry. And they'll turn one ear towards you. They'll do that, like try to like get a better line of sound there. So, and this is a real problem, because if you can't understand what people are saying, it causes social isolation, depression, anxiety, and cognitive decline. So this also goes into, this is accelerated if you don't wear your earplugs. So like you're looking at, this is added to this later in life if you don't take care of your ears. So this is like what happens over your lifetime right here. 20 years, 40 years. So this is me. I'm like right here. 60 years and then 90 years. So we can see that this is at 8 kilohertz right here. So this is dropping off pretty quickly as you're getting older. And this is just a fact of being human. So this already happens just by being older. And then you can accelerate this stuff by not wearing your earplugs. All right. Cool. Tinnitus, high-pitched whining noise. Okay, I'm not going to have time to go into that right now because we got to get out of here. I apologize for going over on time a little bit right there. But tinnitus is that hearing, the ringing in your ear, also caused by if you don't wear your earplugs. So you can see that I've got a little bit of a soapbox here. Wear your earplugs, please. All right, my friends, we're going to come back next class to talk about human voice. I'm sorry to like cram so much in there, but this is cool stuff. Hope you believe me. All right, have a great day. I'll see you guys later.